Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlan, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the 2019 drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
The Future of Canada, United versus Separated, is a 5-part series. Listen to all 5 parts on TalkDigitalNetwork.com, HowStreet.com. We have 2 guests on today's show, Peter Downing, the founder of Wexit Canada, online at wexitcanada.com, and Frank Vaughan. He was the People's Party of Canada candidate in Ontario for the 2019 federal election. He's online at frankvaughan.ca. Peter, Frank, welcome to the Future of Canada, United versus Separated, Part 1 of 5. So starting off with Peter, what's the latest at Wexit Canada?
So we received our official party, federal party eligibility this past Friday. So we have just kind of kicked off, kind of getting the sense of letting people know that we're recruiting candidates for a nomination to represent the 104 different ridings across Western Canada. So nominations at wexitcanada.com is where people can express their interest, and we send them the candidate package and generate a pool of candidates in each riding for our members to vote on who they want to see represent them in the next federal election or any upcoming by-elections.
Frank, what's the latest at frankvaughan.ca?
Well, simply put, if you want to ask the latest at frankvaughan.ca, it's not going to steer into Wexit right now. I went down a rabbit hole last night that I really wish I hadn't have gone down. The open advocacy of acceptance and cultural tolerance for pedophilia. That's kind of the rabbit hole that frankvaughan.ca is going down. But as far as Canada goes, you know, we just went through the federal election, which I did run as a candidate in. I may consider doing that again in the future. I don't know. I don't know if that's where I can be the most effective. Canadians, 97% of Canadians, including millions upon millions of Albertans, voted for the status quo and voted for their oppressors. And until we change that culture, which is it's a constant in Canadian politics, whether you're voting Liberal or you're voting Conservative, you're voting for people who support the status quo in this country. And until we can actually get people to change that habit and vote for something new and vote for something different, we're going to be trapped. And that's kind of the issue that I'm stuck on right now, is trying to get people to think outside the box, because none of the parties, and I'm sure Peter and I agree on this one thing, we probably agree on a lot, but none of the mainstream parties represent Canadians' interests in general and don't represent Western interests in general. And the PPC had a plan that basically would deliver to Alberta fixes on equalization, fixes on pipeline, fixes when it comes to native issues, and barely 2% of the population voted for it. So that's something that I'm working, I hope culturally, to change before the next federal election. That's kind of my focus, is the culture that is holding this country back.
Peter, what do you see as the positives for Western Canada separation?
Well, the ability to provide political solutions, or for Western Canadians to receive political solutions, or political representation that benefits them directly. Right now within the federal system, and to touch on what Frank said, we do agree on a lot. But this one where we do not agree is that the federal system, as it's built, or as it was cobbled together, or as Western Canada was added in to Confederation after the terms of Confederation were written, that this country does not benefit, and it's actually meant to colonize Western Canada by separating, by having control over, by, say, for the individual provinces being independent, or reconfederating as a Western Canadian Republic. We have the ability to take our $20 trillion resources, our $50+ billion of taxes, just in Alberta alone, to take care of problems here: homelessness, mental health, addictions, First Nations issues and concerns, attract investment, to make Western Canada the Dubai of North America. That is within our ability. What is not within our ability is to change or improve Confederation from within. We simply don't have the votes. The only leverage we have is our geopolitical, the land that we occupy, and that's, that's the benefit that we can offer Western Canadians: economic liberty, social stability, and Western self-determination.
Frank, what do you see as positives for Western Canada separation? Well,
the main positive of the movement is it is bringing attention to the fact that the West is alienated. And that is something that needs to happen. It brings attention to the fact that Confederation, as it is currently construed, doesn't do a very good job of representing Western interests. Or actually, and it's not just the West, it's the interests of anybody outside the GTA, or Montreal, or even to a degree, an increasing degree, Vancouver or Calgary, which are electoral politics, because they're based on population, doesn't do a very good job of representing the interests of the land. So I think this Wexit brings attention to that, has the potential to bring attention to that at least. But the issue, like one of the issues that I have, is that this idea that Alberta actually controls its resources. It doesn't. It's dominated by China, more and more Saudi money, and American money. And that's an issue that no Wexiter I've talked to so far has been able to deal with. How do you deal with foreign ownership? How do you deal with the fact that if you separate, you're going to be dependent on international organizations for your independence when you're already so largely foreign owned? And my answer, and this is a problem that faces all of us, is we have to get together as Canadians, and we have to put these things on the table, and we have to start reclaiming our sovereignty. 37 million people have a lot more clout than 4 million people. And that's what we have to do. If we want to maintain our independence from America and China, we have to come together as a country. If we balkanize and fragment, you can look throughout history to see examples of how that it always fails. Everybody ends up in a position of subjugation in their newfound independence, and that's a problem.
We'll have more with Peter Downing and Frank Vaughan right after the break.
Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Peter Downing, the founder of Wexit, and Frank Vaughan, a Federalist who ran for the People's Party of Canada in Ontario. Peter, what do you see as negatives for Western Canada's separation?
People in Quebec and Atlantic Canada wouldn't receive transfer payments, and they would be sad.
But apart from Quebec, dining here at the table at your expense, what else?
I think something that Frank touched on, which I think is a cursory issue, but it's identity. I think part of it is we've never been given or allowed to develop our own identity organically. So when Frank talks about, being swallowed up by the Americans or anything like that, I think that's more of an identity issue. So.
No, it's a financial issue.
Or no, I think it's
it's reality. It's called leases, Peter. You got to figure that out.
Okay. The bigger issue is it's an identity issue. It's an identity for Western Canadians as to who we are. And I submit that we're hardworking, decent people who don't take stuff from other people. We've got integrity, toughness, integrity, and the will to win. And we can solve all the other problems, but at the core of it is the identity and who we are as a people. So that's a piece that needs to be developed, but I think will develop under fire. And as we see more setbacks and more negativity legislated through our federal government and the left-leaning groups that prop them up, I think that identity will be forged, just like it's been through fires and floods and all the other kind of stuff. But we will forge our Western identity, and I think that will make that right now is something, and once that happens, it'll make separation a lot easier.
Frank, what do you see as the negatives for Western Canada splitting away?
Well, right there, Peter has just admitted that he doesn't have a plan. He said, we'll develop it under fire, and he ignored the issue of leases and foreign ownership. Whether it's Fort Mac, whether it's the oil sands themselves, 60% of oil flows out of the country are dominated by China. These are very important issues. Nobody explains how they're going to deal with that. And when we talk about identity, Western identity is strong. Whenever I go out there and I breathe the air, I can feel it. It's a beautiful place. It reminds me of Ontario in the 90s, and it still reminds me of rural Ontario, because there's a lot of us here that feel the same way as Westerners. We want freedom, we want liberty, we want fairness, we want respect. We want to be able to own our guns, we want to be able to live our lives, we want to be able to pursue happiness, we want to be able to pursue prosperity. And we have a lot in common. I think the Canadian character isn't defined by progressives in Toronto. And the biggest mistake that we run into is that it's not just liberals who kowtow to these progressives, whether it's in Toronto or Montreal. It's also the Conservative Party of Canada. And there's no stronger bastion of Conservative Party support than Alberta, and it doesn't make any sense.
I'll just jump in because you did set up a straw man when you said I didn't answer your question, or I just...
Well, you didn't.
I wasn't asked the question by Jim, but I'll answer it since you're asking me. The way, if you look historically, if you look back into the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s of the OPEC countries, mostly within the Middle East, and if you take a look at their domination and their subjugation by foreign ownership, by the British, the Americans, and the Dutch, they eventually kicked them out under the pretext, or basically the dictate of national security.
Okay, so is your plan then to nationalize those industries? Is that the idea?
Well, the reality is we've got to look at it. We've got to look at national security, and where it makes sense, where we need to end foreign domination, we end foreign domination. Wherever it is based on, well, not if nationalization of certain aspects is the only answer. I'm not an ideological person. I like free markets. But if we're dominated to the point that we have no say over our land or our resources, maybe we need to look at that. And that was a successful approach in the 1950s and 60s. And you look at Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Oman and those countries right now. There is one historical example of how they did it successfully. And I say, if we can't take the free market approach and we have to end foreign domination, we should look at different options to the extent that it's acceptable to Western Canadians.
Would you compensate those properties that you seize? Would you give them money?
No, listen. I just said, you're asking me right now for something 3, 4, 5 years down the road right now.
You're looking to create a country. You need to have these answers. Like, you're looking to create a nation in a province that can't even mark an X beside a ballot that actually represents their interests.
What you also can't do is say, this is exactly what's going to happen 3 years from now, or 4 years from now, or 5 years from now, from a project management perspective, or from an infantry perspective on a battlefield. You can have your plan, but your plan the best laid plan falls apart under first contact, under first shot, when you start receiving the first bullets. So the reality
But you usually have a plan when you go into battle. There's always a plan.
I just told you what the high level plan was and the approach. And if we have to modify that approach, or we have to adapt to different circumstances or realities, we will. You're asking me to say exactly what's going to happen when you can't control external factors. That's not pretty.
No, I mean, it's pretty important. I mean, you're talking about seizing... You're talking about seizing billions of dollars in assets. That's what you're talking about. Seizing billions of dollars in assets, and you don't have a plan for paying for them. Or a plan for what happens when China says no, or when the Americans say no, you don't get those leases back. That's important.
Yeah, well, again, you're straw manning me in your pigeon.
No, it's not. That's specific. You're using
exactly what you're doing. You're saying it without giving a chance to answer.
No, I'm trying to get you to freaking show me your plan. This is the problem. There's no plan. You don't have answers.
You're not accepting what you're listening to, and I think this is the problem with the PPC. This is the reality.
No, I'm not the PPC. I'm Frank Vaughan. Don't. That's a straw man. I don't represent the PPC. I represent myself here, a federalist in Ontario.
Well, you already brought up the fact that only you were crying that only 2% voted for you guys, and I'm about to tell you why. The reason is you approach it from an ideological perspective, thinking that how the ideal or this is exactly what it's going to be 3 months, 3 years, 3 decades from now. That's
not what we did. You didn't even read the platform, did you? Well, we made some concrete policy proposals. You talk about ideology. You're the guy doing that. We actually put on the table the bills that we would repeal, the laws that we would replace, what we would do for you, that we would open equalization and revisit it and make sure that Alberta wasn't getting ripped off. That's what we did. We were specific. We had a plan, Peter. You need to have a plan.
Well, the results of your plan got you your electoral results. And if you'd like to know why Canada voted the way it did, I can tell you, instead of lecturing Canada, instead of complaining why they didn't vote for you or why they voted for the status quo, look at it from a marketing perspective. Try to figure out why they didn't vote for you. The first reason is that Canadians mostly are, if you look at the two main human motivators, fear and greed. Fear always wins out over greed. So the fear of a Justin Trudeau re-election, the most reasonable thing to do is they're going to vote for the Conservatives. I don't agree. I didn't vote for the Conservatives. And by the way, before you accuse me of saying I didn't read the PPC platform, I was a PPC member. And I would be a PPC conservative if I believed that the Canadian Federation worked for Western Canada. So,
well, I was giving you the benefit of the doubt. I mean, if you were actually a PPC member and you read the platform, then you're deliberately misleading people about what we tried to do by saying we were ideological.
Okay.
So that's okay. At least you own that.
Okay. Well, again, this is why people don't vote for you guys. You're trying to sell a product right now.
No. You're trying to, I am Frank Vaughan. I'm not the PPC. So don't make this about the PPC. I'm here to debate Western separatism and try to get answers out of you that I can't get out of anybody else as to what your plan is. Like a specific plan.
Okay, go on our website for the specific plan. If you want the specific plan, you're welcome to go on our website, wexitcan.com, under platform. And in the first page, in the first screen, it also has something called the plan. And to show how we're going to achieve separation. It's all right there. But what becomes tedious to me is when I tell you a high-level approach that encompasses for the general direction that we're going and accounts for the flexibility that you don't know what's going to happen 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road. So that
That's a great way of saying you don't want to commit.
No, it's about knowing the realities that we're not the only people on the battlefield, that there are opposing people on the battlefield. And when you talk about...
You're right about that. I mean, you had the Freedom Party that you could have voted for at the provincial level, and again, Alberta decided to send Kenny, who's a federalist. So, I mean, how do you change that?
Stop talking for a second and allow me to finish my thought. When it comes to, you talk about, well, you're not going to pay people. Well, we do have over $20 trillion of resources.
In the ground, not in cash. You would need to borrow against that from somewhere.
Well,
so where do you borrow the money from?
Yeah. Look at
the financing.
You've got America who doesn't want to see the rise of China. You've got China that needs energy. Instead of being owned and dominated by two foreign entities, you've got the ability to come to the middle and work with both entities. So we can be a better friend and neighbor to the Americans, definitely, than Ottawa is being right now. But the overall approach is we do what's in our best interest, and we got to have the smart people in the room, which we do inside and outside this country, that we don't talk about a whole lot, to deal with these issues as it comes up. Right now, we're building a party, and we know Western Canadians know that they do not want to be ruled by Ottawa. They do not want to be ruled by Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, which each have 10 senators. But less than 1 million people, and we've got 6 senators for 4.3 million people, or the equalization, or carbon tax, or a part of the country that does not care about the needs of the concerns of this part of the country. You cannot sell these solutions to Atlantic Canada or to Quebec or to Ontario with aging population who want to be taken care of, and again, off the backs of Western Canadian dollars. You can't sell this to Quebec, who does not want to rely on Alberta energy and wants to continue to support SNC-Lavalin, who they're heavily invested in, and North African and Saudi oil development, which they're heavily invested in. So it's those personal corruptions and those personal economics that fight Western Canada and that don't allow us and will not allow us to thrive. We cannot vote ourselves out of this situation. The only thing we can do is separate.
Well, quite simply, you are trying to vote yourself out of the situation by creating a political party that people will vote for. So that's sort of that's a bit of a contradiction. And when you talk about people and not, hold on. I shut up when you were talking. I would like to talk. You talk about the people of Quebec. Public opinion surveys show that they would rather have Albertan oil than they would Saudi oil. But their government doesn't allow it. Why doesn't their government allow it? Because they don't have a choice. It's the same problem that the federal politics faces. And when presented with choices, people over and over again don't vote for it. They don't vote for it. They didn't vote for it in Alberta at the provincial level when they put Kenny in. And they didn't vote for it at the federal level. I mean, there were alternatives already in the provincial election. I mean, right now, this is another thing that comes up, is the idea that Quebec has this special treatment, which they do, but they also have a provincial government that asserts themselves. See, Alberta could elect a provincial government right now that could assert themselves against Ottawa. And it's not just Easterners. This is a misnomer. The influence of China and the Americans on Ottawa's decisions outweighs anything New Brunswick and Nova Scotia can levy. And what you're saying is that in your plan of independence, if I'm getting this right, because you're not very specific, you would go to China and you would go to America to borrow against your resources. So you would get your financing for your nationalization program from international finance. At the same time as you would depend on the United Nations to enforce your rights as a landlocked nation.
Oh, there was one that you were wrong with. That I don't know where you said that. It might have been on your Facebook page that we would rely on the United Nations. No, we recognize the fact that United Nations treaty allow landlocked nations to get their resources to the coast. It's only United Nations countries that enforce that. So no, we're not looking for other countries or United Nations to enforce that.
Did you or did you not tweet that that's what you would do? You would rely on that treaty to get your product to market. Did you or did you not tweet that?
Again, I tweet the fact that those treaties exist. For us to get our resources to market, or simply put, if Canada wants to block that, that's fine. They want to continue to landlock us, that's okay. We will landlock Canada from access to the Pacific Ocean. And they will lose out on the $28.5 trillion of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And we can slap 300% levies on British Columbia. We'll see how quickly they start to play ball when you threaten them with not being a G7 nation anymore and when you start to look at leveling the TSX.
I see. Okay.
It's time for a break, and we'll be back right after this.
Vaughan Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Vaughan's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at vaughanresources.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Peter Downing, founder of Wexit Canada, and Frank Vaughan, who ran for the PPC in the federal election in Ontario. He calls himself a federalist and feels that Canada can find solutions within Confederation. Going back to Peter, are regional Wexit parties being formed to run in upcoming provincial elections and also in the territories?
Provincially, yes, not in the territories. A little bit of different legalities when it comes to the territories, and there just simply isn't the demand or any kind of real express demand right now.
Wexit, British Columbia has formed. They are registered with elections BC, and we are now collecting the signatures required to register Wexit, Alberta, provincially in Alberta, to assert Alberta interests. Wexit, Saskatchewan, for the same reasons, Saskatchewan, and Wexit, Manitoba, for Manitoba issues.
Peter, is Wexit having protest events coming up?
No, we actually just had one this past Saturday at the Alberta Legislature. So where we're focusing now is just a lot of the unglamorous work, a lot of door knocking. Obviously, we're still continuing to recruit our nomination candidates federally, but provincially is really door knocking, signature collection. Our team going across. We're heading out to Saskatchewan in a couple of weeks to do some development there. They're not too far off. So that's the main focus of signature collection, getting the parties registered and having leadership races right afterwards.
Is Canada a dominion, Peter, and what does it mean?
I don't, there's some guys who talk about the weak constitutionality or the weak constitutional basis for Canada, and I'm sympathetic towards that position. I'm not a lawyer by trade. My background's policing and military and public service. So I definitely would like to see experts hired to look at the difference in that. Obviously, there have been some demarcation points. In 1931 with the Statute of Westminster, and colonial status getting stripped. 1965 when we got our flag from the Queen and we stopped being called the Dominion of Canada. There's definitely some sort of tie there. There's definitely, if Prince Harry and his wife want to come to Canada and Trudeau's just fit the £500,000 bill for it, almost $1 million security a year. There's something definitely going on there. And I think that's worth a little bit of further exploration by experts who can make it understandable for everybody and how it affects us.
Frank, is Canada a dominion, and what does it mean?
Well, one of my pet projects, or one of the things that I'm passionate about, is doing something with the Constitution and with Confederation that opens up the Senate and makes it regionally weighted. When Trudeau came into office, one of the positives, or one of the things that I thought might be positive to come out of his administration in 2015 was his promise of actually talking about electoral reform, and we know that one of the first things he did was break that promise, and then went on an apology tour. I think we should, and I've been a big advocate for this. I don't know why we're still tied to the Queen. I don't know why our institutions are still tied that way. And I think one of the simple things that we could do is start electing our Governor General. We don't need to open up the Constitution for that, so that would give us not a fully construed executive branch, but it would certainly be something that we could start. And I think Canadians would support an elected Senate, a regionally weighted elected Senate. It's long since past time we modernized our institutions. And I haven't met a single person in my travels who doesn't think a constitutional conversation would be a good thing to have. We should have the right of recall for our MPs. That's something that we should do. We should do it right now. It's something that I talked about with the PPC and people in the PPC, and they were open to that idea, but that's something that I'm passionately behind. I think fixing Confederation is a task that is easier than breaking the country up. That might actually lead to us being a strong coast-to-coast nation that asserts itself, because we can fortify. If we use our collective clout to start taking back our sovereignty, and not from just the United Nations, but also from foreign ownership. We mentioned Saskatchewan. More and more of the agricultural land in Saskatchewan is owned by Chinese entities. And that's a problem. And that's something that's been accelerated under all governments since Martin Chrétien. They opened the door, Harper kicked it wide open, and Trudeau has allowed it to keep expanding. That money's coming in and it's buying up influence. And I don't think that money is just going to let go. And that's a concern, and I'm desperately concerned about Canadian dependence on the United Nations. That we get most of our orders from New York, not from Ottawa. Our diktats come from New York. One of the things I'm curious about is when it comes to Wexit, the declaration on the rights of Indigenous peoples. I know that at some of the events that Wexit has had, you've read out that Treaty 6 announcement. Not even once. Not even once, no? Not once? No? Okay, so you're not, you don't support that?
The majority of the First Nations, it's our First Nations supporter who came up with the hashtag FNExit. And I made a joke saying, if I've been treated as badly as the First Nations have been in Canada since Confederation, I'd be heading for the FNExit too. The reality is the First Nations people in Western Canada, and Alberta in particular, and I've policed on some of the roughest reserves in Canada. The living conditions are appalling. And, whether it's being forced to sign treaties at the end of a gun or at the extermination of the Buffalo residential school program, all that kind of stuff. And so when it's our regular blue-collar, everyday First Nations people who are hardworking, decent people who support Wexit, they're industrious people, folks who are supporting the Eagle Spirit Pipeline, that kind of stuff, they come over our way. You've got the chiefs who they publicly come out against us because we haven't approached them. Well, we're not going to approach them because they only generate for their power and the ability to represent their own people. But when their own people, who are just like us, we're all getting screwed by our own politicians, whether we're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, and they're supporting the Wexit movement. So it's regular people who support Wexit, but no, we don't support any UN declarations or anything like that. And two other things. When it comes to, you mentioned pedophilia at the onset, you went down that rabbit hole, and not needing a queen. And I want to point out the fact that either British intelligence super sucks, or they super knew about it when you had Jeffrey Epstein hanging around with Prince Andrew, or you got Jimmy Savile hanging out with Prince Charles. So I definitely sympathize with you and agree with you on that issue 100%, the normalization of pedophilia that's coming from the political left in general. That's a huge issue. And the second thing, and we've always said it, is that if the rest of the country wants to open up the Constitution, and they want us to have an equal elected effective Senate, proper seat count, Kill Bill C-69, C-48, carbon tax, unfair equalization, having free trade. If the rest of Canada wants to do that, now is probably the time. Because the only thing Western Canada controls is our ability to separate. So I agree that the only fix for this situation is a fix of the Constitution. Stephen Harper wasn't able to do it in 9 years. And again, we aren't conservative fanboys in any way, shape, or form. The amount of racism we got on our page from CP conservative, federal conservative, and provincial conservative trolls yesterday when we announced one of our first candidates, who's a turban-wearing Sikh, was awful. And I've called out Jason Kenney and Andrew Scheer to denounce those comments publicly. Haven't seen anything from them yet. So again, there's a lot that we agree on, and we do, and I agree, and our organization agrees that a fix of Confederation is the only way. We're going to continue to push towards separation. If the rest of the country wants to have a conversation, now is the time to do it.
Well, and when it comes to that that time that Harper was in office, I mean, he had the political power for 4 or 5 years to do things, and he did not. I disagree that Alberta has no power under Confederation, because with Alberta and rural Ontario, we put Harper in office. We gave him that majority. The unfortunate thing is that Harper wasn't representing Alberta's interest any more than he was representing the interests of those in rural Ontario that put him in power. I think when it comes right down to it, there's no choice. There's no political choice, and people are stuck in their routines and their habits. They vote Conservative, they vote Liberal, or they vote for the Dippers or the Greens, which I will never understand that. But there's basically, when I was debating against 4 people who agreed on just about everything. They represented differing degrees and variations of the exact same themes. One of the things that got Doug Ford elected in Ontario was the boroughs around the center of Toronto. So Scarborough, Pickering, Brampton, all these places there are heavy immigrant populations. To your comment about the Sikh candidate, I got no problem with Sikhs. They put him in power, and they did it because he diverged so sharply from Patrick Brown's leftism, because that's what it was. He was a leftist in some of the things that Doug Ford proposed, and he's backed off on some of them, but he's gone forward on others. But it was those immigrant populations, those new Canadians that actually put him across the finish line. I mean, Pickering Agincourt is and I'm sorry, I mean it's a suburb of Toronto, but it's 95% now foreign born. I believe the statistic is, and it elected Doug Ford in a landslide. So I think what Canadians need is a real choice, and the fear of giving Trudeau a second term is a powerful motivator, but so was the fear of giving Harper a second term. There's this dichotomy that we need to break, or the Conservative Party needs to, for lack of a better term, they need to grow a set and actually start leading from the right instead of catering.
They're going even. I mean, they have chosen to have their leadership selection on June 27th in Toronto this year, the day before Gay Pride in Toronto this year. So, I mean, whatever you think about marching in Gay Pride Parade, that's your own business. I think kind of the virtue signal that we're seeing the Conservatives do, saying, we're going to have a leader who will march in a Gay Pride Parade, when the bigger issues we're facing in Western Canada are jobs and economy, and even gay members who are part of Wexit. They're looking at the same thing, and they're saying, one day it's going to be too right-wing to support energy. And this is what we're seeing with the Conservative Party. And you're right about 2006, that Ontario and Alberta put, rural Ontario and Alberta put Harper in power. But a lot has changed since 2006. We're 14 years further down, I would say. I
was speaking of 2011, the majority. That's what I was talking about.
Okay, you're right. Okay. Well, okay. So, point taken. We're 9 years forward. 9 years more of leftist agitation, external funding, whether it be the open borders type George Soros stuff, and for whatever reason, some yokel out there wrote an article about me being funded by George Soros, which is just absolutely...
That's ridiculous, 100%.
Absolutely insane.
We get the same thing. I mean, I had a guy last night saying, did Trudeau stop paying you, Frank? Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's obviously a conservative who wrote that, and not very creative one at that. So I think that there are a few differences that we couldn't just rely on that Alberta, rural Ontario coalition. And I have a lot of them. I'm from Ontario originally. I'm from Southern Ontario. I'm from the GTA. I understand. I know it. And there's good people there. That's not the issue. Where we look at it from the perspective is we have a homogenous conservative voting population federally in Western Canada. And I think the best way forward in terms of dealing with the practicality of the situation is we continue to do what we're doing, because that is what we're going to do. And continue to emphasize that if the rest of Canada wants to have this discussion about fixing Confederation and making it fair, then you need to have that discussion now. And I think that there's a huge niche, and I know, Frank, you said that you're not representing the PPC. I think there's a huge niche that the PPC could fill across Eastern Canada, so Ontario East. A little bit of a shift of focus on industry, so automotive, hydroelectric, competitiveness dairy, obviously not the cartels, aviation, fisheries, that kind of stuff. And it's just a little bit of shift in focus to people's jobs and their having enough for retirement and not paying away in taxes. I think there can be a better national dialogue between Eastern Canada and Western Canada, because we're never going to see eye to eye with the Liberals in Western Canada. We are not going to see eye to eye with the Conservatives, and I think the mask is starting to come off the Conservative Party, and I think people are starting to wake up to it in Western Canada. We're never obviously going to side with the Greens or the NDP. So we have an ability to have a discussion with the PCC. We believe in the same things with immigration and with globalization. Our focus is a little bit more, actually quite a bit more industrial. We address the mass migration. We say it's in our policy, but our focus is jobs, energy sector, protecting the livelihoods of Western Canadians. And I think we can continue to have this national dialogue with folks, right-minded people in Eastern Canada, saying we have to fix the Canadian Constitution and Confederation, otherwise the West is going to leave. And this is what that means for you in Eastern Canada, in Quebec, in transfer payments, in old age, all that stuff. And recognizing that Canada will not be a G7 nation, will not enjoy the privileges and the rights and everything that it has right now. So now is the time to fix it. And the only pressure that's going to make it work, and it has to be credible, and we have to mean it, is through separation.
Thank you very much for being on the show, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thank you. That's really good. I enjoyed it.
Listen to part 2 of this interview with Peter Downing from Wexit Canada and Frank Vaughan from frankvaughan.ca online at talkdigitalnetwork.com, howstreet.com. If you have any questions for our guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.